Welcome to KneeToKnee. I'm your host, Mark Merritt, and I am genuinely fired up about today's conversation. My guest today is Darren Parry, the former chairman of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. He's an educator, author, and a man who carried a book across the finish line that his grandmother started before she passed away. That book tells the story of the Bear River Massacre, the largest massacre of Native Americans in U.S. history. And Darren has made it his life's work to make certain that that story is heard and never forgotten. If this one hits home, do me a favor and hit the like on this episode and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the conversations we have coming up. Today, there's some real wisdom in what Darren shares. He talks about what it means to be a man, how to lead, how we serve, and where connection actually comes from. This is not a history lesson. It's a conversation about responsibility, about what indigenous culture understood about community that our modern world has slowly walked away from, and how we can find our way back. So let's buckle in and let's get knee to knee with Darren. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Knee to Knee. I'm really excited today to introduce you to our guest. His name is Darren Parry. He is the former chairman of the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. He's an educator and author of the Bear River Massacre, a Shoshone History. That book actually began with his grandmother, the tribal historian for their people. And when she passed, before she was able to finish it, Darren picked it up and carried it home. He teaches Native American history at Utah State University and serves at the University of Utah and holds an honorary doctorate at Utah State University as well. What excites me most about having Darren on today is that he is literally fighting to reconnect his people to their own land and their own story. And I can't think of anything more powerful than that. So Darren, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Knee to Knee.
It's an honor to be with you, and I'm happy to share whatever wisdom or knowledge I've garnered over the last 66 years.
It's awesome that over time, we gradually bring those into place, right? I hope we get smarter as we get older.
Yeah, I think that's the point. And in my culture, that's definitely the point.
So yeah, you and I have played a little bit of phone tag for weeks. And so I was super excited when we were able to finally connect and be able to have a conversation. But can you give our listeners a little bit of history of tying in with the Shoshone tribe? And I know you have a lot of history here in northern Utah. And so I'd love to have a little bit of history there if you could.
Yeah, I mean, our people were indigenous to northern Utah, southern Idaho. Obviously, back in those days, there weren't borders or boundaries or states or lines. We were hunters-gatherers. We traveled with the seasons. Long story short, we were here when the Mormon pioneers got here. The Cache Valley was discovered in 1855. They sent saints there. The depletion of the natural resources the Shoshones relied on really led to starvation, stealing, as the white settlers would call it. We'd say borrowing. And it led to the biggest massacre of Native American people in the history of our country, called the Bear River Massacre, on January 29th in 1863. And so from that point on, our people have been resilient. We stayed here. All of the survivors 10 years later end up joining the LDS Church in a mass baptism.
Really?
And so we quickly assimilated into the local culture. But, that's a 200-year history in, 1 minute.
Yeah, exactly. That was really, really
complicated.
I'm sure it is. So,
yeah.
Wow, I wasn't aware that it was the largest massacre, which is just, sadness in itself, right? But
sure. We believe it was more than 450 Shoshones died that day, mostly women and children.
Okay, that's a deep pause there on my part. So help me understand, as you mentioned that many of them joined the church after that, but what are you doing to help connect your people back to the land, back to their stories, back to who they are and their whole history and everything?
My grandmother said one time to me when I was younger, Darren, no one has ever wanted to hear our story before. One day you will need to make them listen. And, I've always just felt the responsibility. It's never been a burden for me. It's been more of a responsibility to carry the story forward, to honor truth telling. I'm a knowledge holder passed down from a wise old grandmother. And in our way, that oral history keeping was critical. And so I'm just here because I feel a need to make sure our people's story is heard and never forgotten.
Yeah.
And so that's been my story from then on, is to make sure we honor truth telling, not beat people over the head with it, but do it in a way that we can come together and reconcile and make things better.
You mentioned we talked a little bit earlier about the book that you're able to finish that your grandmother started. Um,
Yeah.
what I want to talk about is both the acts of quiet and purposeful, really kind of looking at that male responsibility within your people and what it feels like to carry something bigger than yourself. What kind of burden? I mean, in your with your people, how is the best way that the men actually are able to make those connections and back in with their culture, with nature, with God, with whatever
That's a
it
big
is?
question. And as I said a second ago, I've never looked at this journey as a burden,
Right.
but more of a responsibility. And so, I mean, we live in a system today that teaches interdependence. They teach men to be interdependent, and you're the breadwinner and you're responsible for all of these things. But in indigenous cultures, men knew who they were because of where they came from. They learned from the land, their people. They knew their responsibilities because it was taught to them early from their elders. I mean, young men would grow up and be at the elders' feet, hearing of responsibilities and given responsibilities when they became of age. And it was always a learning experience. It was never a hierarchical way of learning like our system teaches us today. There's always something at somebody at the top that disseminates knowledge down.
Right.
And if we're lucky enough or work hard enough, we can, climb that
We can get a
ladder.
little scraps from the
An
table
indigenous
along the
way of
way or whatever it is.
yeah, exactly. It was never about status for Native American men. It was always about responsibility, responsibility to the land, responsibility to their community, and responsibility to their loved ones. And so it was always about service. It was always about making sure. I look at it more, and I teach this class called Indigenous Land Stewardship, but I look at it more as a circle of responsibility, and everybody shares in that way. And I think there's so much burden put on men today as they've got to be interdependent and they've got to, have a status. And I think that's not such a great thing. I think we can learn from the land. We can learn from the elders. In my culture, the elders are everything.
Right.
They're the pinnacle of knowledge, and rightfully so. So it's just important that we look at it a little more holistically and a little more understand that men's place in this world that we live in today is really should be defined about how much we serve our communities, how much we take care of our families, and how much we take care of the resources that we have.
What kind of things could men in our day do to help them? I mean, because we are in such a world of disconnect. And I've said this on other podcast episodes where we talk about we were moving along okay, and then the pandemic hit, and everybody's self isolated, and we really kind of just went into our own little caves, whether it's our house or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I don't think those connections have gotten even really any better, especially as technology continues to move along and we find ourselves so disconnected. Are there things you mentioned serving in the community and those kind of things? What kind of things do you see that could help create deep intergenerational bonds? Because you mentioned that the elders are everything, right? I mean, they're the pinnacle. How can we build that?
That's a pretty tough question because it's not it's
Mhm.
relational and it's generational. And so it's not something that we can go to the store and pull off the shelf and
We
say,
wish.
here's the fix. Yeah, we wish we could, but that's not the fix. But I think the easiest place to start is where you're
Mhm.
at. If you've got a relative or an elder in your family, start with interview an elder while you still have time to interview an elder. Take your kids along, your sons along, or daughters even, and start building these connections that are bigger than you. And so we need to support each other, and we need to not look at the world as us versus them,
Right.
but we need to start building bonds of friendship and ways to look at the world a little differently. And so, there's not one set of answers, but it's just returning to our responsibilities and understanding that our place in this long line of ancestors and generations has been broken and disconnected by a system that severely tries to do that to us. But I think an indigenous man becomes wholer as they serve their family, as their children see them serving their family and their community and the land, and teaching them those basic traditions of what's really important. There's a lot of things we worship in this
Yeah.
world, and they're not important, but it's getting back to the things that really matter. And I think if you identified 2 or 3 things in your life that truly, truly matter, and every one of your things that you're going to do in your life is around that. And how, if I do this, is it going to strengthen my 3 most important things in my life, or is it going to take away? And then go from there, because I think your conscience, your spirit, whatever you want to call it, will remind you of the most important things in your life. And this modern world of technology and social media and all those other things tend to take us away from the things that really matter. And I think for a man to be able to lead in that way, in a way that's not hierarchical or interdependent, is maybe scary,
Right.
but I think it's so vital and needed today.
I agree. I mean, there's so much that I've learned over the last, just kind of getting ready for today. And I think many of us have known that so much wisdom is passed on through oral history with indigenous people. And I think we miss that when we talk about that intergenerational bonds. I think a lot of us miss that. I'm really blessed that I have a brother who a couple of years ago came out and said, "Hey, let's do a monthly family Zoom call. And we're going to do this family Zoom call, and mom and dad are going to be on, and we're just going to ask them to have them tell us stories. And we're going to record those stories." And it has been a fascinating thing when, sometimes mom is stepping forward and giving a piece of what she remembers about something. And then dad tells something he remembers of something. But it's been a great experience for us. I have 4 brothers, and for us guys to be able to, we've learned things about our folks that we've never known. And I'm in my late 50s, right? And I was like, really? I never knew this, right? So that oral history that we're trying to get recorded has been a really valuable thing for us to build those bonds with our folks. That's one thing that works for us guys, right? It's first of the
Sure.
month on a
Yeah.
Sunday. It literally is 5 p.m. Mountain Time. We're on a Zoom call, which is just, we have a set time and we try and stick to that pretty closely.
Yeah. That's cool. When my grandmother would always tell me this quote, and I never forgot it. She said, "When an old Indian dies, a library burns." And as a young kid, I really didn't resonate with me as a kid, but it was so ingrained in my skull that now that I'm older, I would say to grandma, not only when an old Indian dies, but when an old person
Yeah.
dies, a library burns.
Never
And
thought of
what
it
you're
that
getting
way.
with your local Zoom calls is
Yeah,
fantastic.
that's
Yeah.
a really fascinating way to look at that. I've never even made that connection. That's really cool. Once again, sometimes those older people are way wiser than us younger people. Thank you to your grandma. That's one I'm going to ingrain in me, and I'm going to
He's
share with the
nicer.
guys on our next call. So, yeah, that's a great one.
Okay. Sounds good.
So let me ask you this. You left the chairman seat to run for Congress in a race that you actually you kind of felt was a long shot. And you did it anyways because it mattered. That's a tough one. And I kind of did the same thing way back in the day. I think you and I were living in the same town when I ran for mayor, and over in
Yeah.
Paradise, Utah. And so that was one of those very similar things. But tell me a little bit about that. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to step into an area that, man, it's a long shot. I don't know if I'm going to do this. I don't know if I'm going to make it there. So tell me about that decision-making process and what helps you stand up and say, this is what I'm doing.
I had a few people call me. And look, I had one person in my life that thought I would win. It wasn't me, because I'd lived here my whole life and I knew the writing on the wall, but my wife thought I'd win, even up to election night. But she's from Florida. her whole life in Florida, so she doesn't really understand. So, but I had a few people reach out and encourage me, a few people that we would say, have standing in the
Mhm.
community or in the larger community, and one even in the church. They just talked to me, and the elder in the church that called me, he's an indigenous man, and he was in the quorum of the 70. He just said, Darren, our youth, our native youth need to see good examples, and they need to see that we can still do hard things. And for me, and I had already kind of decided, I never really believed I was doing it. It was never about that, but I believed the cause was worth it. I believed I needed to stand up and not only give people an option, but give my people a
Yeah.
voice, give people a perspective that they've not heard. And so while I knew the writing was on the wall, I also knew that I was going to get to debate on live TV.
Yeah.
I was going to be able to use my voice in a way that mattered and that it would reach thousands and thousands of people, whether they believed it or not. It didn't matter. But sometimes, standing up for what you think is worth it is absolutely worth it. And that's why you do it. I didn't do it to win. I didn't do it out of I wanted to be popular or anything else. I did it out of responsibility. And so, that's where we're at.
Of editing, but I'm going to do some editing there. So, we were talking about that courage of stepping up, even when it's hard, being able to do hard things.
Yeah, and
And
for me as a tribe, well, for me as a tribal elder, and that was the chairman until they made me step down. It was just an easy decision. And I wanted to lead by example, and I did it for our youth, but I did it mainly to share a knowledge system that most people have never heard about. And so, and from a perspective that has been dismissed or said is old and not relevant to today's society. And I think what indigenous
yeah,
people have to say is absolutely critical to today's society. And, maybe we need to get back to some of those old ways. And running absolutely introduced me to people I would have never gotten to meet. And so it's put me in circles that has expanded my reach. And my reach is just humbly to bring the message of the Shoshone people and their message and just talk about their history, but do it in a way that unites us. It's okay if
right,
we acknowledge hard history. It's not okay to beat people over the head with it and cause guilt trips with it. But it's okay if we use it as a way to learn and then use it as a way to move forward together. And as a man, I just feel that responsibility to share and then listen. We don't listen enough. And
right,
the best leaders, the best men, the best thing we can do is listen. Listen to our people, our families, our loved ones. Listen to those we don't agree with and sit down and truly try to understand. And I think,
right.
running for Congress absolutely made me hone into some of those skills and made me realize my nothingness in District 1, first of all. But, I got my message out. And so I think at the end of the day, it was a positive experience.
I understand that to an extent. So we're coming up to our typical end. So I'm going to ask you the question that we ask everyone is, what is one thing that our listeners can do today to build deeper connections with those around
That's the easiest question you've asked me tonight. So
them?
I'll say it this way, go serve. And by that I mean serve your family, your communities, those who you love, those you don't love. When I was a little boy, my grandmother had this beautiful bald eagle headdress on the mantle above the fireplace. I knew that chiefs only wore those, and I didn't dare ask her if I could wear it because I wasn't a chief, and I knew full well what my culture believed. And so one day I asked the question, Grandma, I want to be a chief one day because I knew that was the only way I would get to wear that thing. And she said, sit down and let me tell you a story. She said, when a young Shoshone boy or girl does an act of kindness or service, the chief and the tribe would give them one eagle feather. She then said to me, what do you think would happen if that boy or girl kept doing kind things? And I said, well, they'd get more eagle feathers. And she said, you're right. Then she said, one day when the chief gets ready to go to the next world, he'll call everybody together and he'll say, I'm about to meet the creator. I need to select a new chief. I want all of you to pull out your eagle feathers and show them to me. She said, the chief isn't the toughest or the bravest or the strongest. The chief is the man who led a life of service and kindness in his community.
Hmm.
So she said, go be a chief. Go be a good sibling, be a good friend, be there for somebody that really truly needs it. And if you live your life that way, all of you non-Shoshone people, if you live your life that way, you'll become a leader in your community. Not leadership that's rooted
Yeah,
in power and authority, but in love and kindness and wisdom. And my goodness, isn't that the kind of leaders the world needs today?
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
go serve, go be a chief.
All right. Well, that is awesome. I thank you so much for sharing that. And Darren, thank you so much for coming on for a few minutes with us today and sharing your thoughts of the Shoshone tribe and the indigenous people and what we can learn from them. I love what your grandma said. Like I said, I'm going to share that with the guys and pass that along as well with my family.
Well, thank
And
you for
so
having me. Thank you.
absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us on another episode of Knee to Knee. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, all the stuff that you know we need to do. And I look forward to, and I appreciate all of you coming on. And I look forward to seeing you on the next go around. Thanks again. We'll see you.